In the age when land mattered more than lives and silence was the currency of power, there existed a countryside that history barely remembered but never truly forgot. This was a place where laws were written to protect property, not people. Where morality bent easily under the weight of profit. Where regret, when it came too late to be undone. The farmer's name was Elias Crow. He was known across the region not for cruelty, but for control. Control over his land. Control over his workers. Control over his reputation. Men like Elias did not shout. They did not strike in public. They ruled through expectation, through quiet dominance, through the understanding that resistance only made life harder. He had inherited the farm from a father who believed discipline was love and ownership was destiny. By the time Elias took full control, those beliefs were no longer taught, they were instinct. Elias was not young, but he was not old either. His face carried the stiffness of someone who had never allowed himself softness. His hands were scarred from years of labor, yet his clothes were always clean, his boots always polished. He believed appearance was a language and he spoke it fluently. To outsiders, he appeared respectable. To those beneath him, he was immovable. The farm sat on fertile ground, surrounded by low hills and long dirt roads that led nowhere quickly. Crops grew well. Livestock thrived. Money flowed steadily, if quietly. Yet despite all this, Elias's house was empty in a way no wealth could fill. His wife had died years earlier, not from illness but from distance. She faded slowly, like someone realizing too late that her life had been signed away to something unfeeling. When she died, Elias did not mourn publicly. He buried her properly, continued working, and never spoke her name again. Silence, after all, was easier than memory. On the morning that changed everything, Elias did not wake with intention. The day began like every other. He drank his coffee without tasting it. He reviewed his ledgers with mechanical focus. He gave orders to workers who nodded without meeting his eyes. He had planned to visit the market only to sell grain and purchase tools. Nothing more. He did not plan to buy a human being. The market sat at the edge of town, half mud, half dust, crowded with voices that rose and fell like waves. Animals were tied in rows. Goods were stacked on cloths. Men argued loudly over prices, pretending outrage while calculating profit. In one far section of the market, slightly removed, slightly quieter, stood the traders of flesh. Elias had passed that section many times before without stopping. Slavery to him was not cruelty. It was economy. It existed as naturally as fences and debts. He neither celebrated it nor questioned it. He benefited from it indirectly, which was enough. That day, however, something drew his eyes. She stood among three others, 2 men and 1 older woman, yet she did not blend in. Not because she was louder or more desperate, but because she was neither. Her hands were bound loosely, not out of kindness, but because the traders knew she would not run. She stood upright, shoulders straight, gaze lowered but not broken. Her beauty was not decorative. It was unsettling. Men slowed when they saw her. Conversations faltered. Prices elsewhere stopped matching. She was young, younger than Elias preferred to acknowledge, but her age was difficult to measure. Hardship had shaped her early. Her skin bore no visible scars, which in that place was rare. Her hair was thick, dark, tied back simply. Her face held symmetry that drew attention, but it was her eyes that held people longer than they intended. They were observant, awake, as if she was not waiting to be chosen, but waiting for something inevitable. Elias felt irritation before interest. Beauty, he believed, complicated things. Beautiful things attracted envy, competition, desire. They disrupted order. He told himself to walk past her. He nearly did. But then the trader spoke. "She's rare," the man said casually, as if commenting on livestock. "Not just the face. The temperament. Doesn't cry. Doesn't beg. Buyers like that." Elias stopped. He asked no questions about her name. Names did not increase value. He asked about her origin, her health, her obedience. The trader answered smoothly. She had been sold once already. Returned. The buyer had changed his mind. That detail should have warned Elias. Instead, it intrigued him. Returned slaves were uncommon. Regret, once money changed hands, was rare. The price was high. Too high, Elias told himself. He argued it down not because he could not afford it, but because dominance demanded it. The trader resisted, then conceded. Coin exchanged hands. A receipt was written. Ownership transferred with the same finality as land. The girl did not react. No tears. No pleas. No trembling. That disturbed Elias more than anything else. On the journey back to the farm, she walked behind the cart without being told. She kept pace without strain. When the road narrowed, she slowed automatically. When it widened, she did not attempt to run. Elias told himself this was ideal behavior. Yet the longer the road stretched, the heavier his chest felt. He noticed things he did not want to notice. She never looked at the sky, only at the land. She adjusted her steps instinctively when the soil changed. When a crow cried overhead, she paused. Not in fear, but recognition. Elias shook off the unease. Superstition was for weak men. By the time they reached the farm, the sun was already lowering. The workers noticed her immediately. Whispers spread. As lingered too long. Elias felt a flash of irritation. Not jealousy, but ownership asserting itself. He ordered the workers away and brought her into the house himself. He gave her food, clean water, a blanket. These were not kindnesses. They were investments. He instructed her where to sleep, what would be expected of her starting the next morning. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded once. That nod unsettled him more than resistance would have. That night, Elias sat alone at his table long after the lamps were lit. The house felt different, not fuller, heavier, as though a door had been opened somewhere unseen, letting something old wander in. He told himself it was imagination. Guilt, perhaps, though he would never use that word. When he finally lay down, sleep did not come easily. His dreams were vivid, too vivid. He dreamed of his fields cracking open, not from drought but from something pushing upward beneath the soil. He dreamed of his father standing at the edge of the land, shaking his head in silence. He dreamed of the girl standing in the distance, her back turned, her shadow stretching impossibly long across the earth. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. For the first time in years, Elias Crow felt something dangerously close to doubt. He rose, dressed, and stepped into the hallway. The house was silent, too silent. He moved toward the kitchen, expecting to find her asleep on the floor as instructed. She was not there. A flicker of anger surged through him, sharp and immediate. Escape, disobedience, proof that his instincts had been right. He reached for the door, ready to summon workers, ready to assert control. Then he heard movement, not running, not hiding, but calm footsteps coming from the direction of the barn. When he opened the door, the morning air felt wrong. Cold, though it should have been warm. Still, though the wind usually moved freely across his land. In the distance, he saw her standing among the animals. Not working, just standing. And in that moment, before he spoke, before he shouted, before he took the first step toward regret, Elias Crow understood one terrible truth. He had not purchased a servant. He had purchased the beginning of something he did not yet have a name for. And the next day, he would regret it. The second sunrise did not arrive the way mornings usually did on Elias Crow's land. There was no gentle warming of the soil, no gradual lifting of mist from the fields. Instead, the light appeared abruptly, harsh and colorless, as if the sun itself had no patience for what it was about to reveal. Elias stood at the threshold of his house longer than necessary, his boots planted firmly on the wooden floor, his hand resting against the doorframe as though it might steady him. He told himself he was simply assessing the morning. That was what a good farmer did. He observed, he calculated, he prepared. But the truth, whether he accepted it or not, was that he was stalling. The barn sat ahead of him, its wide doors half open. Inside, the animals should have been restless, lowing cattle, stamping hooves, the usual impatient sounds of hunger and routine. Instead, there was a stillness so complete it pressed against his ears. Silence on a farm was never neutral. It meant something had already gone wrong. As Elias stepped onto the packed earth, he noticed the soil felt colder than it should have been. He glanced toward the sky. No clouds. No sign of a storm. Nothing to explain the chill that crept up through his boots and settled uncomfortably in his legs. She stood just inside the barn, exactly where he had seen her moments earlier. She had not moved. Not a step. Not a shift of weight. It was as if time around her had slowed while the rest of the world continued reluctantly forward. The animals surrounded her in an unnatural circle. Cows stood with heads lowered. Horses remained unervingly calm, their ears forward, their breathing slow. Even the barn cats, creatures known for their independence and instinctual caution, sat nearby without fear. Elias felt anger rise first. It always did. Anger was easier than confusion. "What are you doing?" he demanded. His voice echoed more sharply than intended, bouncing off the wooden beams and disappearing into the rafters. The animals did not react. The girl turned her head slowly, deliberately, as though she had been expecting him. "I'm waiting," she said. The simplicity of the answer unsettled him. Waiting for what? Instructions? Punishment? Freedom? Elias did not ask. He did not want to open that door. He ordered her to work. She obeyed immediately. That obedience, however, only deepened his unease. She moved efficiently, but without haste. She did not require guidance. She knew where the tools were kept, how the animals were fed, which stalls needed cleaning first. Elias told himself these were common skills. Any slave with farming experience could manage them. Yet she had never been on his land before. As the morning wore on, small disruptions began to occur. At first, they were easy to dismiss. A bucket cracked under minimal pressure. A fence post loosened despite having been secured only days earlier. A sack of grain split open, spilling its contents into the dirt. Elias cursed, blaming old materials, careless workers, his own oversight. But then the calf collapsed. It had been healthy the previous evening. Elias knew because he had checked it himself. Now it lay motionless in the straw, eyes dull, breath gone. No signs of illness. No injury. Just absence. The girl stood nearby, watching. Elias felt something twist in his chest. Not sorrow for the animal, but the sudden, irrational sense that he was being observed. Not by her alone, but by something larger, something older, something patient enough to let him draw his own conclusions. He snapped at her to move on. She did, but the feeling did not leave. By midday, Elias found it difficult to focus. His thoughts returned again and again to the moment at the market. The trader's casual tone. The mention that she had been returned. Returned by whom? Why? Elias had not asked. And now the omission gnawed at him like an infection. He told himself he would sell her. That decision, formed quietly and firmly, brought a fleeting sense of relief. He would undo the mistake. He would reclaim his order. She was an asset, nothing more. Assets could be exchanged. But even as he formed the plan, doubt crept in. To whom would he sell her? The market would ask questions. Buyers would inspect. Rumors might already be spreading. A returned slave carried an invisible stain. And worse, Elias feared what might happen if another man took her. The thought was irrational but persistent. As if releasing her would not end his problem but transfer it, and perhaps bring it back multiplied. That afternoon, Elias noticed the workers behaving differently. They avoided the barn. They whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. One man crossed himself when the girl passed by. Another refused to drink from the well, claiming the water tasted off. Elias threatened punishment. The threats did nothing. Fear, once planted, did not require encouragement. As evening approached, Elias called the girl into the house. He intended to establish control. Clear rules. Clear consequences. He reminded himself that regret was a luxury for weaker men. She stood before him, hands folded, eyes lowered respectfully. Yet he could not shake the sensation that she was listening to more than just his words. "You will sleep where I tell you," he said. "You will not wander. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not leave this property without permission." She nodded once. "Do you understand?" "Yes." Her voice was calm, unaffected. No resentment, no fear. That frightened him more than defiance would have. That night, Elias locked every door himself. He checked the windows twice. He barred the back entrance to the storage room where she was to sleep. These were unnecessary precautions. She had shown no sign of resistance. But Elias had learned long ago to trust his instincts, even when he could not explain them. Sleep did not come easily. Sometime after midnight, Elias woke to a sound that did not belong. It was not a scream. It was worse. It was a sound shaped like one. A breath pulled too sharply inward, as though someone had begun to cry and stopped midway, came from outside the house. Elias sat up, heart pounding, listening. Silence followed. He told himself it was an animal. Fox, perhaps, or the wind. But the wind was still, and the animals had been silent all day. The sound came again, closer this time. Elias rose, grabbed the lantern, and stepped into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under his weight, loud in the oppressive quiet. He paused outside the storage room. The door was intact, the lock secure. He exhaled sharply, annoyed at himself. Then he heard movement, not from inside the room but from the walls. A soft brushing sound, like fabric against wood, like someone passing just behind the walls, just out of sight. Elias backed away, his grip tightening on the lantern. He told himself he was overtired, that imagination thrived in silence, that fear was a sign of weakness. He returned to his room and lay awake until morning. When dawn finally arrived, Elias felt no relief. The house felt wrong. Not disturbed, not damaged, occupied. He moved quickly through the halls, checking doors, windows, corners. Everything appeared as it should. Too much so. Order without warmth. Cleanliness without comfort. In the storage room, the girl sat upright, awake. She looked at him before he spoke. "You heard them too," she said quietly. Elias froze. "Hear what?" he demanded. "The ones who come when regret begins," she replied. "They're never loud for long." Anger surged, sharp and desperate. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "What did you do?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him with something close to curiosity. "I don't do anything," she said. "I arrive." The words struck him harder than any accusation. Elias stepped back, suddenly uncertain whether he was the one with authority in the room. He ordered her to prepare breakfast. She complied. But the sense of control he once wielded so effortlessly was slipping through his fingers like dry soil. As the day progressed, the land itself seemed to resist him. Tools broke inexplicably. Horses refused to be led. One of the wells produced water with a metallic taste that made Elias gag. The workers grew more distant, more frightened. One left without notice. Another begged to be reassigned far from the house. By evening, Elias could no longer deny it. He regretted the purchase. Not because of morality, not because of guilt, but because something fundamental had shifted the moment he brought her onto his land. Something had awakened. Something that did not respond to authority, threats, or money. That night, Elias confronted her again. "Who are you?" he demanded. She met his gaze fully this time. "I am what comes after ownership," she said. Elias laughed. A short, brittle sound. "You're nothing but a girl," he said. "A slave." Her expression did not change. "So was the last man," she replied. Until the second morning. Elias felt the room spin slightly. He steadied himself against the table. "What happened to him?" he asked, despite himself. She hesitated just long enough for hope to flicker. Then she spoke. "He regretted me." The lantern flickered. Outside something howled. Not like an animal, not like a man. And for the first time since inheriting the farm, Elias Crow understood that regret was not emotion. It was a process. It had already begun. By the third morning, Elias Crow no longer measured time by hours. He measured it by how long he could go without feeling watched. Sleep had become fragmented, short stretches of unconsciousness punctuated by jolting awakenings, each one accompanied by the same certainty. Something was wrong, and it was already too late to stop it. The land reflected him. Where the fields once rose and fell with familiar rhythms, they now appeared strangely flat, as though depth itself had been erased. The air felt heavier, resistant to breath. Even sound behaved differently. Footsteps did not echo as they should. Voices seemed absorbed rather than carried. Elias began to understand that the farm was no longer simply a place. It was a witness. He avoided the girl that morning. Not intentionally. He told himself he was busy, that there were matters requiring attention, repairs to inspect, counts to review. Yet no matter where he went, she remained just outside his awareness, like a shadow that never quite touched him but never left either. When he finally saw her again, it was by accident. He had gone to the north field to examine the damage to the irrigation trench. The soil there had collapsed overnight, caving inward in a way that made no sense. As he crouched to examine it, he noticed footprints nearby, bare feet, pressed deep into the damp earth. They led nowhere. The tracks began abruptly and ended just as suddenly, as if the ground itself had accepted her presence and then erased it. Elias straightened slowly. She stood a short distance away, watching him. Not intrusively, not defiantly, patiently. "You walk the land like it owes you answers," she said. Elias felt anger flare, but it burned weakly now, starved by exhaustion and uncertainty. "You were returned," he said instead. The words left his mouth before he had fully decided to speak them. "Why?" The girl did not respond immediately. She lowered herself onto a fallen fence rail, smoothing her dress with deliberate care, as though preparing to speak at length. "They always ask that," she said finally. "Never before they buy. Always after." Elias crossed his arms, bracing himself. "The first man," she continued, "bought me because he thought beauty would make him feel alive again. He had a house full of noise and still felt alone. By morning, he said I reminded him too much of everything he had lost." She looked at Elias then. "He returned me before sunset." Elias swallowed. "The second," she went on, "believed owning something untouched would make him powerful. He spoke of legacy, of sons, of bloodlines. By the second morning, he could not look at his own reflection." She paused, allowing the silence to stretch. "He did not return me. He disappeared." Elias's chest tightened. "How many?" he asked quietly. She considered the question. "Enough," she said. "More than a coincidence. Fewer than a legend." Elias turned away, staring out across the fields. He tried to tell himself this was manipulation. Stories designed to inspire fear. But the land, the animals, the air itself seemed to confirm her words. "You're saying this is some kind of curse," he said, scoffing weakly. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "Curses are unfair. This is balanced." That word, balanced, echoed in his mind. Elias returned to the house alone. He sat at the table where he had once conducted business with confidence, where decisions had felt solid and final. Now the wood beneath his hands felt brittle, as though it might splinter at any moment. He thought about regret. He had always believed regret came from mistakes, bad calculations, missed opportunities, poor judgment. But this felt different. This regret was not about what he had done. It was about what he had revealed. The workers noticed his change. They had stopped asking questions. They no longer came near the house unless summoned. Some refused to meet his eyes. Others whispered prayers under their breath when they thought he could not hear. One older man, who had worked the land since Elias's father's time, finally spoke. "You should let her go," the man said quietly. "Some things aren't meant to stay owned." Elias fired him on the spot, but the words lingered. That night, Elias dreamed again. He stood in a long corridor lined with doors. Each door bore a name carved into the wood. He recognized some men he had known, Men who had vanished over the years, men whose ends had been explained away as accidents or debts unpaid. At the end of the corridor stood the girl. She did not turn when he called her name, because he did not know it. When he reached her, she finally spoke. "You're not special," she said. "You're just next." He woke screaming. The scream echoed longer than it should have. By morning, the farm had changed again. A fence lay flattened, as though pressed down by an enormous weight. A tree near the eastern boundary had split cleanly in two, its interior blackened, though there were no signs of fire. The well near the barn had collapsed inward, sealing itself like a wound closing. Elias realized something then, something deeply unsettling. The land was not decaying. It was withdrawing. As if rejecting him. He confronted the girl again near dusk. This time there was no shouting, no commands, only desperation thinly disguised as authority. "If I sell you," he said, "will it stop?" She studied him carefully. "Stop what?" she asked. "This." He gestured helplessly. "All of this." She rose slowly to her feet. "They don't buy me," she said softly. "They buy themselves." Elias shook his head. "I didn't know," he insisted. She looked almost sympathetic. "They never do." Silence settled between them. "Tell me," Elias said finally. "Tell me what you are." She did not answer immediately. "I was born into a system that taught men they could own consequences," she said. "Every hand that passed me along believed they were different. Kinder, smarter, more careful." Her gaze hardened. "They were wrong." Elias felt his knees weaken. "So what happens now?" he whispered. The girl stepped closer than she ever had before. "Now," she said, "you begin to remember everything you taught yourself to forget." That night, Elias could no longer stay inside the house. The walls felt too close, the shadows too dense. He wandered the land with a lantern, moving aimlessly, drawn by an urge he could not name. He passed the barns, the fields, the broken well. Everywhere he went, the light seemed dimmer than it should have been. Near the southern boundary, he found something new. A marker, rough wood, driven into the ground. No name, no date, just a symbol carved deep into the surface. A circle, broken by a single vertical line. Elias did not know what it meant, but he knew instinctively that it had not been there before. When he returned to the house, the girl was waiting. "You're seeing them now," she said. "Seeing who?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. "The ones who came before you," she replied. "Regret leaves footprints." Elias sank into a chair. "I'll give you anything," he said. "Money, land, freedom. I'll write it down. I'll make it legal." She shook her head slowly. "Freedom given by ownership is still ownership," she said. "Then what do you want?" he demanded. Her answer was quiet. "I don't want anything." That was when Elias finally understood. This was not a negotiation. This was not a haunting. This was an accounting. And the balance was coming due. By the fourth day, Elias Crow no longer pretended the farm was his. Ownership is a fragile illusion. It survives only as long as the world agrees to behave as expected. Crops grow when planted. Animals obey when fed. People submit when threatened. Elias had built his entire life on that agreement. And now, one by one, those silent contracts were being broken. Morning arrived without birdsong. That alone was enough to unsettle any man who lived by the land. Birds were the first to sense imbalance. They fled storms before clouds formed. They abandoned poisoned ground before sickness spread. Elias stepped outside expecting to hear wings scatter at his presence. There were none. The sky was empty. Elias stood on the porch longer than he realized, staring upward as if waiting for the world to correct itself. It did not. The air pressed down on him, thick and unmoving, carrying a smell he could not identify, earthy, metallic, old. Behind him, inside the house, something creaked. Not the familiar sound of settling wood, but a deliberate shift, as though weight had been redistributed. He did not turn. He already knew who it was. "She's not in the house anymore," one of the workers whispered from the yard. fear etched openly across his face. No one's seen her since last night. Elias felt no relief. If anything, the absence made the pressure worse. He had come to understand that when the girl was visible, things remained contained. When she was not, the farm behaved unpredictably, like a wound left uncovered. "Get back to work," Elias snapped, though his voice lacked its former authority. The worker did not argue. He did not obey either. He simply left. By midday, only 2 workers remained on the entire property. By the 4th day, Elias Crow no longer pretended the farm was his. Ownership is a fragile illusion. It survives only as long as the world agrees to behave as expected. Crops grow when planted. Animals obey when fed. People submit when threatened. Elias had built his entire life on that agreement. And now, one by one, those silent contracts were being broken. Morning arrived without birdsong. That alone was enough to unsettle any man who lived by the land. Birds were the first to sense imbalance. They fled storms before clouds formed. They abandoned poisoned ground before sickness spread. Elias stepped outside expecting to hear wings scatter at his presence. There were none. The sky was empty. Elias stood on the porch longer than he realized, staring upward as if waiting for the world to correct itself. It did not. The air pressed down on him, thick and unmoving, carrying a smell he could not identify, earthy, metallic, old. Behind him, inside the house, something creaked. Not the familiar sound of settling wood, but a deliberate shift, as though weight had been redistributed. He did not turn. He already knew who it was. "She's not in the house anymore," one of the workers whispered from the yard, fear etched openly across his face. "No one's seen her since last night." Elias felt no relief. If anything, the absence made the pressure worse. He had come to understand that when the girl was visible, things remained contained. When she was not, the farm behaved unpredictably, like a wound left uncovered. "Get back to work," Elias snapped, though his voice lacked its former authority. The worker did not argue. He did not obey either. He simply left. By midday, only 2 workers remained on the entire property. Elias tried to focus on tasks. He walked the fields, inspected fences, examined livestock. Everywhere, he found signs of quiet rebellion. Gates left open despite having been secured. Feed untouched. Animals huddled together far from the barns, refusing shelter. Near the old orchard, Elias found something that finally broke his denial. The soil had been disturbed. Not dug, not plowed, but pressed down, as if something heavy had knelt there for a long time. The grass around the depression had yellowed, brittle and dead. In the center of the mark lay a single object. A shoe. It was old, cracked leather. Not his size. Not any worker's. Elias recognized it with a sickening certainty. It had belonged to his father. He remembered that shoe. He remembered the day his father had died. The way the body had been laid out stiff and silent. One shoe missing, dismissed as a burial oversight. Elias staggered backward. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." The ground did not respond. By the time Elias returned to the house, night was already falling. He had not noticed the hours passing. Time no longer behaved normally on the farm. It stretched and collapsed without warning, as if responding to something other than the sun. Inside, the house felt different again. Not occupied, crowded. Elias lit every lamp. The light barely pushed back the shadows. He felt them pooling in corners, gathering along the ceiling, lingering just outside his vision. He heard whispers, not voices but impressions. Regrets without words. Thoughts that were not his pressing against his own. He reached for the bottle he had kept hidden in the cupboard and drank deeply. The alcohol burned, but the burn brought no comfort. The whispers grew louder. Then the girl spoke. "You're not meant to drink it away," she said calmly. Elias spun around. She stood near the fireplace, exactly where his wife used to stand years ago, hands folded, posture composed. "How did you get in?" he demanded. She tilted her head slightly. "You stopped locking things when you realized it didn't matter." she replied. Elias laughed. A broken, humorless sound. What do you want from me? He asked again, the question stripped of anger now, reduced to something smaller, more honest. Why me? She studied him with an intensity that felt invasive. You keep asking the wrong question, she said. It's not why you. Then what is it? He whispered. It's how long, she answered. She moved closer. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Elias's breath fogged faintly in the lamplight. You see, she continued, most men break sooner. They panic. They run. They confess. They beg. You held on longer than most. That's not a compliment, Elias said hoarsely. No, she agreed. It's a measurement. Elias's knees buckled, and he collapsed into a chair. His hands trembled violently now. His body was betraying him, reacting to truths his mind had spent a lifetime avoiding. I never killed anyone, he said suddenly. I never. She raised a hand gently, stopping him. You don't need blood on your hands, she said. You just need to believe someone else's blood doesn't matter. The words struck deeper than any accusation. Elias remembered faces he had dismissed. Workers injured and replaced. Families displaced for land expansion. Debts enforced without mercy. Lives reduced to ledger entries. I didn't know, he said weakly. You were taught not to, she replied. That night the farm came alive. Not with growth but with memory. Elias heard footsteps outside the house. Many of them. Slow. Dragging. Uncoordinated. He peered through the window and saw shapes moving through the fields, barely visible, like silhouettes carved from darkness. They did not approach the house. They circled it. Elias backed away, his heart hammering. What are they? He asked. She stood beside him, gazing out calmly. They're not here for you yet, she said. They're remembering where they stood. The ground trembled slightly, like a deep exhale. Elias felt something crack inside him. Not fear, not panic, but the last remaining fragment of certainty he had carried since childhood. I regret it, he said suddenly. I regret buying you. I regret everything. She turned to him slowly. That's the word, she said. But it's not the end. What do I do? He begged. Her voice softened. You sit with it, she said. You don't sell it. You don't bury it. You don't pass it on. The house groaned as if under strain. You feel it, she continued, until it finishes shaping you. Outside, one of the shadows stopped. It turned its head toward the house. Elias screamed. The lanterns went out all at once. Darkness rushed in, thick and absolute. In the black, Elias felt hands. Not touching, not grabbing, but hovering, reminding him of weight, of presence, of consequence. Through the darkness, the girl's voice reached him one last time that night. Tomorrow, she said, you won't ask what happens next. You'll know. And for the first time since the second morning, Elias Crow did not survive the night unchanged. When morning came for the fifth time, it did not announce itself. No sun crept over the hills. No light filtered through the windows. The darkness simply thinned, reluctantly, like a veil being lifted by hands that did not want to let go. The world did not wake, it resumed. Elias Crow was still alive. That fact alone surprised him. He lay on the floor of the main room, unsure how long he had been there. His body ached in places he could not name. His throat burned as if he had been screaming for hours, though he could not remember doing so. When he tried to rise, his limbs responded slowly, as though they no longer trusted him. The house was silent. Not the unnatural silence of the previous nights. This was different. This was aftermath. Elias pushed himself upright and looked around. Furniture remained in place. Walls stood intact. Lamps hung where they always had. Yet the house felt hollowed out, like a shell emptied of something vital. He spoke the girl's presence aloud before he realized what he was doing. Are you still here? No answer. For the first time since bringing her to the farm, Elias felt something dangerously close to panic. Not fear of her, but fear of her absence. The land had grown violent when she disappeared before. He understood now that she was not the cause of what had happened. She was the boundary. Elias staggered to the door and stepped outside. The farm was unrecognizable. Fields that once stretched green and obedient now lay dark and brittle, as if burned from beneath rather than scorched from above. Fences sagged or lay flattened into the soil. The barns stood, but their doors hung open, their interiors empty. No animals remained, not dead, not escaped, gone. The well had collapsed completely, sealed by earth that looked compacted by enormous pressure. The orchard trees had shed their leaves overnight, their branches bare and black against the gray sky. And in the center of the land, directly where Elias had once taken pride in standing to survey his property, something waited. Path. It had not been there before. The grass on either side of it remained dead and flattened, but the path itself was clear, pressed down as if by countless footsteps over a very long time. It led away from the house, toward the far edge of the property, toward land Elias had never bothered to cultivate. He knew, without understanding how, that the path was meant for him. Elias did not hesitate. There was nothing left to command, no one left to order, no illusion of control to maintain. He followed the path with the heavy obedience of a man who had finally understood that resistance was no longer an option. As he walked, memories surfaced unbidden. Not the memories he chose to recall, but the ones he had buried. Faces blurred by time, names he had refused to learn, moments when he could have acted differently and did not. Each step forward brought a memory closer, sharper, heavier. Halfway down the path, he saw her. She stood waiting near a dead tree, her posture calm, unchanged. The world around her looked no healthier, no kinder, but it felt contained again, as if her presence anchored something that would otherwise tear itself apart. "You came," she said. "I didn't have a choice," Elias replied. She nodded. "None of them do by the end." Elias stopped a few steps away, afraid to come closer. "What happens now?" he asked. She studied him carefully, as though assessing whether he was finally capable of understanding the answer. "Now," she said, "the land finishes what you started." Elias laughed weakly. "I never started any of this," he said. Her gaze sharpened. "That's the lie every one of you tells," she replied. "That harm begins somewhere else." The path ended there. Beyond it lay uncultivated ground, dark and uneven. Elias realized he was standing at the edge of his ownership, the boundary he had never cared to cross, because nothing profitable lay beyond it. "I want to make it right," he said suddenly. "I'll confess. I'll tell people what I did, what I allowed." She stepped aside, revealing what stood behind her. Markers, dozens of them, rough wooden posts driven into the earth, each one bearing a symbol, a mark, a carved shape. No names, no dates, just evidence of presence, of acknowledgement. "These are the ones who mattered enough to be remembered," she said. Elias stared at them, his breath shallow. "What about me?" he asked quietly. She looked at him then. Not with cruelty, not with anger, but with a tired sort of honesty. "That depends," she said. "Do you still want to be owned by your regret?" The question struck him harder than anything before. Elias looked back toward the farm, toward the house, toward the land he had once believed was proof of his worth. "I don't own anything," he said finally. The girl nodded once. That was when the ground shifted. Not violently, not suddenly. It opened slowly, like soil remembering how to receive what had been pressed into it for too long. Elias felt himself sink. Not falling, not dragged, but accepted. He did not scream. He did not fight. As the earth closed around him, he understood the final truth. Regret was not punishment. It was recognition. And recognition, once complete, did not need an audience. When the ground settled, Elias Crow was gone. There was no body, no grave, only a new marker among the others. Weeks later, neighboring farmers gathered at the edge of the property. They spoke in hushed voices. Standing far from the house, they refused to enter. They told stories, how the land had soured, how animals avoided it, how travelers felt ill when passing too close. Authorities came once. They left quickly, filing reports that explained nothing. The farm was abandoned. Time moved on. Years passed. The house collapsed eventually, consumed by neglect and weather. The fields never recovered. No one reclaimed the land. It became known simply as a place that remembered too much. And the girl? She was seen again. Always at markets. Always briefly. Always before a powerful man made a choice he believed was harmless. She never begged. She never warned. She only waited. Those who walked away lived full lives, though they never quite understood why they felt the sudden urge to leave. Those who bought her were remembered, not for what they owned, but for what they finally understood too late. And that is why history does not blame the girl. History blames the belief that ownership could erase consequence.